Hello again, Steve here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about how we can sometimes see change in the most unlikely places. And this would mean, of course, opportunity as well, because that's often where we see opportunity is in the change, right? Now, this idea has come to me as the result of a guy who has a YouTube video. He's called Dr. Turley, Turley. He does some very good commentary on political current affairs rather, and what's going on. And he did this one about Steve Bannon and his kind of outing of the Catholic Church, which is very interesting because a lot of times when we think of Steve Bannon, most people think of Trump and some kind of or a YouTube poop of me by my daughter. But that's another whole story. You can check that one out too. Yeah. So he's apparently, I didn't know this, he's a practicing Catholic. And he is quite skeptical, to be put it very mildly, of the current Pope and the shenanigans that are going on there. And he's actually set up some sort of I guess you could say almost like a Catholic traditionalist revivalist organization in Italy, which is sort of on ground zero of the Catholic Church, right? And he sees the Pope, the current Pope, as some sort of a revolutionary. My understanding is, and of course, I've said it before on this YouTube channel that I believe that the current Pope is there as the result of a coup that took place within the Catholic Church, and that there are currently two popes. Nobody really knows which one is which. I mean, think about it. 600 years ago was the last time a pope resigned, and people say it's because of Benedict's health. I think it's because he was about to expose what was going on in there, and of course this radical agenda to destroy what was left of the church, I believe was the good shepherd, the Jesuit character. I'm not sure what his real background is, but it sounds a little sorted in terms of traditional Catholicism. And I don't claim to be an authority on matters Catholic, but I did grow up in probably the strictest Catholic family I've ever known. I mean, two of my family members are, the most traditionalist nuns that you could imagine. And that's not a very highly sought after profession these days. And, my dad was a monk and my mom was a nun. I mean, you don't get much more religious than that. Although you might ask, why did they break out of there? Well, they have that option, right? In their professions, in their formations rather, they have an option to get out before they do their final vows, and both of them did. But that goes to show you just how strict. And my dad, actually, he was in a cloister order, which was speechless. For several years he didn't speak. I mean, that's pretty hardcore. But that's an aside. That's just to give a little background of where I'm coming from here. But Bannon, interestingly enough, and this is really odd because you wouldn't think that the Catholic Church, it seems to be like this entrenched, unchanging, and of course portrayed as bigoted and so on and whatnot organization. And it's hard to imagine that it would fracture. And there's talk amongst certain groups in the Catholic Church of the whole thing fracturing, which is really, really odd. But then again, maybe not odd, because it's schismed way back when they had the two Holy Roman Empires, right, or the Eastern Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. It's schismed there for sure. So this might be on par with that. I mean, the fractures began probably before Vatican II, I would say. I mean, if you could listen to E. Michael Jones and so on, that's probably true. But anyway, so Bannon seems to be part of this traditionalist movement. And there are other, even religious orders, or religious people rather. When I say religious, from a Catholic standpoint, what religious means is somebody who's of an order, right? Who's taken religious vows. Somebody who's just religious, as in going to church and so on, they're not considered religious. Religious means, so when I say people, there's some who are religious who are of this order. Yeah, there are, and there's, I forget his name now, the bishop there in England, who I talked about earlier, who, as far as I know, was excommunicated from the Catholic Church for talking about this sort of thing. But he sees the Catholics, Steve Bannon anyways, going back to Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon sees the Catholics, maybe not the Catholic Church, but the Catholics, as what he calls ground zero for modern traditionalism. And very interesting. I mean, you put that together with what E. Michael Jones is talking about, and how the only people, in a way, who've really stood against the rise of socialism and communism, especially communism and its modern hellscape that we see today, have been the Catholics. And so that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, who would have thought that the Catholic Church, this old ancient patriarchy, could be shattered into schisms? And it's easier to see, of course, in the Protestant religions. I mean, we see even Anglicanism, which is pretty strong. It's basically split down the middle with the whole, homosexual debate. And that hasn't reached so much within the Catholic Church, mostly because it's not talked about. I mean, I think the Anglicans had a problem, some of them had a problem with ordaining homosexuals. Well, Catholics have been doing that for a long, long time, and not talked about a whole lot. But it's being talked about now, not just the homosexual thing, but the more, the liberalization and the sort of the desecration of the old traditions, right? And we talked about pendulums before, right? Pendulums swing back and forth. And when you have an organization like the Catholic Church, which has stood in its, at least vestiges of it, have stood for several thousand years, a couple of thousand years. When you have an organization that old, it stands to reason that when it gets pushed to more and more liberal ways, there's going to be a pushback. And the pushback may come as a split in the organization, where then you'll go off and you'll have maybe several popes. Who knows? And they'll both be claiming to be the right one. But nevertheless, it's an example of how even very traditional organizations, and I would say especially traditional organizations, when they swing one way, they're going to swing back. And I would say that Steve Bannon, once again, an unlikely character to hear this about, really, to me. Traditionalist, Catholic, practicing Catholic, apparently, and who, and in a way, it's not surprising that he led the Trump campaign. I mean, because he probably saw Trump as an opportunity for returning to traditionalism. And of course, Trump is an opportunist. Trump isn't what people think he is, I don't think. I mean, Trump is a Democrat. Trump is an opportunist Democrat. I think he believes in some of the things he says, but mostly he's an opportunist. But nevertheless, probably Bannon saw the rise of Trump as an opportunity to expose what was going on, because Trump is such a blowhard for what he's pushing, right? I mean, he's a showman, and he's going to expose whatever he can and blow everything up as he goes, if he can. I mean, not maliciously, I don't think. He does it sort of as he's a stage man. He's a showman, right? A showman will put up all kinds of fireworks and what have you to get people to pay attention. So, I mean, he's masterful at that. And Bannon perhaps saw that, he was a force of nature, that Trump was a force of nature, never seen in most generations, who could basically turn the mainstream media into tabloid rags, and it seems like he has, and in the process gained traction for traditionalism. And if that's the case, then he's certainly a very masterful strategist. But it's interesting, yeah. So he's kind of moved on, by the look of it. Steve Bannon has. I see him on speaking tours all over the world, and he's trying to gain allies in traditional movements, and one of which is the Catholic traditional movement, which, by the look of it, is actually gaining steam. I've met young people not long ago, fairly recently, bright young people who are strict practicing Catholics. Very, very interesting. Wouldn't have happened in my generation, that's for sure. At least I wouldn't have found them. At least maybe I wasn't looking. I was in too many bars chasing girls, I guess. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wasn't out there looking for that sort of philosophy or that sort of conversation at all. Steve, you're doing great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.